Welcome to the world united. Welcome to the world united.
Greetings, everyone. I am so honored to be here at this global event on spirituality, and I'm grateful for all those who've had a part in making this important platform for spiritual connection happen. My message is something I'm really passionate about: spirituality and disability. And in particular, I'm passionate about teaching how adversity leads us to the practice of surrender. Surrender without giving up. It's been my life's work over the last 4 decades to help people as a licensed psychotherapist, a certified life coach, and loss and transformational grief specialist. And in those 40 years, I know I look younger than I am, I've come to have a lot to say. This talk usually takes an hour, but time's limited today, so I'm going to give you just a snapshot with some golden nuggets you might want to write down. I'm also going to speak a little slower because attending this global event, I imagine there will be many whose English is their second language. So, not long ago, I was presenting in person, but we can't escape the obvious fact we are on computer screens together right now. And we also can't escape the fact that the world has changed drastically, globally. I think this year has been one of the most dark times, full of global loss and grief in our history. And it calls for us to find our path out of that darkness and into the light of love, not only through our human means, but as much or more on a spiritual level. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I know loss and grief from the inside out and the outside in, both professionally and you will learn personally. And I know how to transform loss and grief through many different avenues, but one of my very favorites is teaching people the powerful practice of surrender without giving up. That's the tricky part, not giving up as you surrender. Really, there's a surrender we could talk about, which is actually giving up, and a surrender, a spiritual surrender without giving up. And there's a big difference between the two, which I hope to clarify for you. Let me ask you this question. How have you been affected by the world we're in right now? Most of us seem to be depressed, anxious, confused by, and even probably more so, fearful about what's going to happen as our very lives are being threatened. We wonder if we are going to be okay, when all this will end and life will be normal again, and how can we control what's happening? There are a lot of questions without a lot of answers, because we are right now living with a lot of fear of the unknown or what's out of our control. I know for me, there is no greater fear than fear of the unknown, except perhaps public speaking. We don't really want to give up at times like this. We want to fight our way out, so we struggle. We live in a state of fear, and we demand control. And if we wave the white flag of submission, we fear it forecasts defeat, helplessness, and hopelessness. And that's almost unacceptable until it isn't. That's when you face the choice between giving up, waving that flag of resignation, or surrendering, letting go, allowing the unknown to unfold without fear. One of the biggest keys that form our choices is our perceptions. What we perceive is what we think, and what we think is what we believe, and what we believe is what we act on. I think this comic is a funny illustration of how powerful our perceptions are. The three-legged dog perceives he's luckier than the two-legged human who thinks she is the lucky one. They each perceive the value of their own condition differently. It's been said that how we do anything is how we do everything. So how we perceive and then respond to any and everything marks the very fiber of our being with the prognosis of healing or suffering. How you perceive a situation can guide you in what choice to make. Sometimes giving up is the answer, and sometimes spiritual surrender is. But really, knowing how and when to choose surrender instead of giving up can make all the difference in the outcome you experience. So what is surrender? In my experience, the moment of surrender can actually be felt, and I think that's amazing. When I discovered it, it was really amazing. It's that pause in the breath between no longer and not yet. This is not an easy breath to take, but it's well worth the inhale and the exhale. Because it's not that it's just no longer, it's also that it's not yet and still unknown. I'd like to offer you a quick glimpse into what I'm talking about through a breathing exercise. First, I'm going to say the instructions, then we will actually do the exercise. So I'll run through this twice. The first time, try and think of what you want to let go of. Close your eyes and imagine some minor problem or fear you want to let go of. Now, as you think of what you want to let go of, I'll give you a few seconds. Take a slow breath in and pause as you get to the top of that breath, the top of your lungs, kind of like what you feel on the upside of a roller coaster. Pause your breathing until you can no longer hold it, then gently let go into a slow exhale, as slow as you can. That's the feeling of surrender. That's the feeling of allowing. Now I'll do this exercise again. Close your eyes and imagine some minor problem or fear you want to let go of. Now, as you think of what you want to let go of, I'll give you a few seconds. Take a slow breath in and pause as you get to the top of that breath, the top of the lungs, kind of like what you feel on the upside of a roller coaster. Pause your breathing until you can no longer hold it. Then gently let go into as slow of an exhale as you can. Feel that. That's the feeling of surrender. That's the feeling of allowing. I wonder, did you feel the release of surrender in that exhale, in that moment? Did you feel it was a relief? I think what lies between these two moments in your breathing is the faith, the trust, let's call it really the surrender, to let go of where you've been and to know in your soul that there is a divine path to where you are going. And that's the part of my journey of chronic illness I want to share with you. You may have suspected, but I don't think you knew that I had a chronic illness and disability, did you? Would you be surprised to know I was in a car wreck that changed my life forever? I lost everything. So I'm as much of a student needing to know how to surrender without giving up as perhaps any of you are right now. And I can tell you from my experience, there is a huge repeat button through life. So it's a really good thing to learn it. In fact, a whole new dimension of my life's work and my missions began by my own learning how to surrender without giving up. After facing the devastating physical, emotional, mental, and even spiritual losses as a result of that car wreck. And that's why this is such a personal message for me. So let me ask, who has been at the doorstep of some sort of adversity, uncertain as how to find their way again, their resilience, their happiness? Or maybe I should say, who hasn't? I think it's safe to assume you have faced a time when something went wrong in your life, because it's a human experience that I don't think any of us escape at some point in our lives. What did you do when you were facing something that seemed insurmountable? I can tell you what happened for me. I went from a life full of success as a psychotherapist in private practice. I loved what I did, and I was so proud that I was fulfilling my life purpose of helping others. It brought me a lot of joy. I had a great sense of humor, a deep sense of optimism about my life, a lot of self-confidence, and I relished my independence. I was in the driver's seat, and there weren't a lot of unknowns I was in a state of fear about. But that all changed when the metal of my car collided with another's. My life became full of not only physical pain and loss of functioning, but also full of angst, depression, helplessness, and worst of all, hopelessness. Not only did I lose my health and physical functioning, but I lost my whole life as I knew it. This one thing created such a ripple effect, nothing seemed the same, nor did it ever feel like it would feel that way again. I was facing the unknown, and I felt a lot of fear and a sense of being out of control. I couldn't seem to fix my body. This was hard for me because I was used to setting a goal and manifesting it. So this experience became sort of a dark night of the soul for me. I lost who I was, and I didn't like who I was becoming. I lost my sense of humor. I lost the business I built over 2 decades, which was my livelihood and my financial independence. And on a spiritual soul level, I lost my life purpose lifting up others who called me a gifted therapist as I helped them transform their lives. And after 6 years of absolute refusal to surrender to the reality that I literally could no longer work, I finally felt like giving up. So there I was, surrendering and giving up. So I finally closed my business and I went on disability, but I was broken and I was terrified of the unknown ahead of me. When I made this choice, I thought I had surrendered, but I came to learn I really didn't know a thing about spiritual surrender, and actually I knew a lot about surrendering by giving up. I think the confusion that I felt between surrender and giving up created a sense of deep failure and defeat, and that made me feel, quite frankly, ashamed. Who wants to surrender to that? I didn't want to face it, so I didn't give up for a long time. But I didn't surrender on a spiritual level either. I spent years in a state of fear and angst trying to control this disabling condition. But in fact, not surrendering to the reality that I couldn't work resulted in such debilitation that there came a time I realized I had no choice but to stop working. Pretty ironic. And it felt like giving up. I didn't see a path to my future. It didn't bring me the peace that comes with surrendering and accepting what is and allowing that breath between no longer and not yet. Nope, I was giving up the struggle to control the uncontrollable, but with resignation and a feeling of defeat. I waved the flag, I lost trust in myself, and I didn't have the trust in anything else that is required in the practice of surrendering. I was disconnected from my spirituality. Frankly, I was kind of upset with what had happened to me. So I started to walk this tightrope between giving up and a spiritual surrendering. Walking this thin tightrope between trust and fear, surrender and control, kept me in a constant state of angst and suffering. Because giving up in the face of adversity is usually accompanied by a lot of mental, emotional, and spiritual trauma. Giving up is a passive choice and leads to a sense of hopelessness, a disconnection from yourself, your true nature, and a higher consciousness. Fortunately, that isn't the only way to face adversity. There is another way, and as you might guess, it's called the practice of spiritual surrender. This term may be one of the most misunderstood on the spiritual path because it is associated and confused with giving up. Surrender is the opposite of you trying to control things, and letting go is not the same as giving up. You can let go without giving up. I think that's the true meaning of surrender. You aren't giving up, you are just allowing someone or something to be in the driver's seat. Surrender is really a choice about ceasing this struggle with not only an acceptance of what is, but surrendering opens a doorway in your mind and heart that leads to realizing there is a higher consciousness, which I call different names, as you probably do. And you may call it something else than I do, and that doesn't matter. What matters is that we open to a relationship that will lead to co-creating with and through you. That is what happens through the practice of surrender. Really, when you think about it, often, in fact, almost always, the path to spiritual awakening is found through the dark and crazy times, by the adversities we face through life, especially the dark nights of the soul. To surrender is to recognize that there is something that resides within each of us, and not only can it be trusted, but it's the heartbeat of the human experience. Surrendering is not a passive choice. It is about letting go and allowing, feeling hopeful and connected to self, others, and the universal love. The other answers to the question we've been talking about, how do we surrender without giving up, are revealed in my 7 powerful practices to manage your mind and heal your heart. I don't have time to give you all of them, but I want to at least give you another one of them. So I leave you with a practice that is actually a fun way to learn about surrender. In the face of adversity, we often tend to get really serious, depressed, and we see ourselves through the lens of our condition. And that's not really a happy place sometimes. We may lose our sense of humor, as I did, and we forget how to be lighthearted and play. But that is the key benefit to surrendering. I'm sure you have heard. Laughter really is the best medicine. This may seem like a small, insignificant, maybe even silly answer, which could be a good practice, but consider this. I really laughed at myself when I had an epiphany one day that one of my 7 practices, called Play in the Balance and Balance in the Play, is actually the other side of the same coin as surrender. Who knew? I couldn't believe that in all those years I missed a real antidote to giving up that was as simple as having my sense of humor back. You see, inherent in the experience of play are 2 divine attributes, joy and creativity. But it's hard to experience joy when you can't surrender. Just imagine trying not to giggle with joy if someone tickles you. You can't help but let go and laugh, sometimes uncontrollably, really. And that's the feeling of surrender. So I invite you to discover this breath of surrender that we've learned about in 2 different ways, but especially that you will find within that tickle. I wish you lots of joy. Thank you for spending your time with me. I hope my sharing was helpful and uplifting. There are many ways you can connect with me, and I'd be honored to hear from you. Contact info is on the next slide. Namaste.